have from our partners at Young Invincibles. I'm going to give a few seconds to let folks get settled in. I know that the websites that Zoom is filtering in folks and getting them all established. So bear with us for about 15, 30 seconds, and then we'll just get started. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of our speakers' times and everyone else's schedule as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. And so good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for our second conversation during Community College Student Week. My name is Dr. Manny Gonzalez, and I serve as the director of the Community College Association of Texas Trustees. In that capacity, I work closely with the trustees and regents of all 50 community colleges across the state. That's about 400 trustees who all are collectively working on behalf of the 750 community college students at our institutions. And so we appreciate your involvement and your efforts, and we're here to support you just as the Young Invincibles team is as well. So again, today we're joined by the Young Invincibles. This organization aims to amplify the voices of young adults in the political process and to expand economic opportunity for your generation. Young Invincibles has expanded from a group run out of a school cafeteria to a national organization with offices across the country. They take on issues related to healthcare, higher education, economic mobility, and basic needs and security. It's an organization that does great work, not just in the Texas as a state, but across the country. They have a presence in DC. They're everywhere, and they're here as advocates for those who often are marginalized. Young Invincibles is committed to expanding economic opportunity for young adults ages 18 to 34 and making sure that their perspective is heard whenever decisions are being made. They focus on ensuring that young communities with the least access to political and economic power have a say in issues of politics and policy that often directly impact them. They're an organization that I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, and I'm always eager to hear about now and forevermore because of all the great work and the partners I've had the chance to work with along the way. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to my colleagues, my presenters, Aurora Harris and Christine Mompoint. So the floor is yours. And again, thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so glad that you're here. Just a little note about the tech. We'll be using the chat and the Q&A features. So if you aren't familiar with Zoom, those things should be at the bottom ribbon. And if you have any questions for us or anything that you would like to share, we strongly encourage you to comment or to share what you're thinking. Very quickly, and I know our excellent introductory speaker, Dr. Gonzalez, just gave this information, but we are a national nonprofit organization committed to elevating the voices of young adults in the political process and expanding economic opportunity for 18 to 34-year-olds. So now a little bit about us. To introduce myself to you all, my name is Christine Mompoint, and I'm the Higher Education Policy Fellow. I'm looking at the attendees, and I recognize some of my great SGA officers that I work alongside in TJC SGA, so shout out to y'all. And then I'm going to turn over an introduction to our Southern Director, Aurora Harris.
Yes, I am the Southern Region Director at Young Invincibles. I oversee our larger policy strategy, fundraising, and youth organizing goals here in Texas. I am based in Houston and was just talking about how much I love the city. So shout out to all the folks that are representing H-Town today on the call.
So before we begin, I challenge you to think about these questions. Who are you? Where do you consider yourself a local, and what's your story? So thinking about who you are isn't just simply your name, but what makes you you? What is the essence of who you are? Why do you get up in the morning? What do you do? Where do you consider yourself a local? I'm a transport Houstonian. I'm really from Miami, so that's still in my heart. So that's where I consider myself a local, but I also consider myself a local of the Houston Community College family as their SGA president and kind of the things that we do on campus there. And then what's your story? What my story really talks to others about my commitment to finish higher education despite all of the challenges that I face with my health. And that's a very large part of my story. Aurora, did you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about who I am, I think about being the daughter of a teenage mother and a woman who taught me all the things about strength, street smarts, and survival. Where do I consider myself a local? Definitely H-Town, but I am a South Carolinian and from the Southeast. I'm a huge, huge Southerner. And when I think about my story, I really think about the fact that I am a first generation college student. And I think about what that experience was like for me, how tough that was to navigate, how that informed a lot of the choices that I make, and how I want to make sure that other first gen students of color have new choices, better choices to be able to make. And that really informs my advocacy work that I do every day.
So here's an overview of what we'll be discussing today. What is storytelling? The definition of public narrative, storytelling for advocacy specifically, and then Q&A and next steps for you and your team. So what is storytelling? Aurora, when you think about caveman drawings, what is like the first thing that comes to mind for you?
I think that the caveman drawings, and I think there's like some debate around what they were for, but I think they were trying to make meaning out of their experiences and sort of what was kind of happening to them in a maybe like a religious sect, I guess, or maybe like a larger purpose to like what they were kind of doing. That's what I think of when I think of the caveman drawings. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think like they kind of I think you see this in all like the Disney movies and like little things, but they were kind of using that to explain to their children the same things, right? So like we still do drawings in like kids books, or when we're trying to explain something to someone like at the elementary level. And so I think that's like a really powerful part of like the drawing and just telling the story of who they were and what they stood for. And I think it's so crazy that thousands of years later we're still having the same conversations about these stories that were painted on rock walls. Some of the core strengths of storytelling, and like the example that we just gave, is to inform or raise awareness of an issue, of a culture, of a background, of an idea, to create an emotional connection or reaction. Some of the drawings that you might see from like previous times in history can sometimes revoke a really emotional connection to maybe like a war or something that kind of took place. And then ultimately it motivates people to take action, when they have like those really intensive photos of like children starving in other places, or like somebody talking about their experience coming to school for the first time and exactly what they felt. It really puts you in their shoes for a second and causes you to rise to empathy. The bottom line is that stories are repertoire of shared experiences. And I love that shared is on here because we all have our own experiences. Like I wasn't a first generation student, but I'm sure that there are things that Aurora and I both had in common when we came to college for the first time. Like my parents had never been to a community college, that had a very negative connotation of it. So me being the first person in my family to not go directly to a four-year institution was a whole new experience for me. Some examples are like films, music, novels, Netflix shows, YouTubers. I mean, media is all around us and it's so important to storytelling. It's personal. I think that a lot of times we think like, oh, I need to have all these like things line up a certain way, or I need to speak a certain way. But it really is about you and what happened to you in that particular scenario that makes the story so impactful. Anyone else can get up and share my story, but no one's going to share my story the way I share my story. So it's about you and finding a way to connect to the audience that's listening to you, whether that's one elected official, a Zoom call of 100 attendees, or even just social media. You never know how far your post will go.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Christine. Talked really about the personal aspects of storytelling, but now we're going to get a little bit into the public narrative and sort of that shared experiences that storytelling kind of brings. So public narrative is really sort of made up of three things. It's the challenges that you faced, the choices you've made as a result of those challenges, and the outcomes you experienced. And when we think about crafting a public narrative, we think about it in these sort of links between the story of yourself, the story of us, and the story of now. And I'm going to break down what the story of self, us, and now look like. And we're also going to spend some time in our presentation thinking about and sharing some other examples of storytellers at YI to really hone in on what we mean by self, us, and now, and how that shapes the narrative. So when you think about the story of self, you really want to think about what has called you in this moment to advocate for community college students or first gen students or students of color or students whose English, might be their second language, whatever that community is. But really, what really has called you in this moment? What personal experience brought you here? And really ask yourself, what specific event led me here? Was it that really that teary-eyed moment in the financial aid office, right? Was it that powerful moment with a college professor, or a really great moment with a college advisor that really led you here? What was it that really got you to this point? And this offers the audience your unique perspective on an issue. So when you're thinking of your story of self, think about really what called you to do this work. When you're thinking about the story of us, you want to think about what constituency or community or organization you belong to. And this is really helping to craft shared purposes, goals, and visions, and being sort of part of a collective community. So really think about, what community or movement am I connected to? For a lot of you, it's going to be your community college family, like Christine mentioned earlier. And so you really want to tell a story that both you and your audience shares. So what are those stories that are really unique to community college students that are like shared experiences across all of you, and kind of thinking about what does that look like? So ask yourself really, like, who is your audience? And how does the audience sort of share that story with you? And then lastly, you want to include the story of now when you're thinking about crafting the public narrative. And this is, what are the challenges that this community faces? What are the hopes and visions of the community? And if it doesn't get addressed, what's going to happen, right? So really create that sense of urgency and immediacy and awareness of the issue at hand, and really try to move your listener to take action on behalf of yourself and your community. Really thinking about, how does this impact us right now? Express urgency to kind of solve the problem, and identify some action steps that your audience can take to move it forward. So don't worry, we're going to look at some examples of self, us, and now, but these are the basics of how you kind of craft a public narrative. So in summary, a good story interests us, right? By letting us know what's the story of self, what led you to this point. Instructs and involves, that's that story of us piece of like, who is this community that you belong to? What are you helping us learn to understand about the community? And then inspires, that's the story of now. What's that urgency? What's that immediate action step that needs to take place? So let's kind of take a look at a couple of examples of this at Young Invincibles. And hopefully this works. So this is Greg Norwood. He's incredible. Interned with us, and he is going to share a story about being a first-generation college student and student debt. So let's take a look at this.
I think the greatest challenge is being a first gen and not really understanding the student loan process, and not understanding specifically the student loan repayment process, which is most important. If I knew then what I know now about student loan repayment and student loan options, I would have been very, very more careful. I would have been very careful and more intentional about what I chose, how much I was choosing to take, the good stuff. But my parents did not go to college. My grandparents didn't go to college. My great grandparents did not go to college. And so to have to do this relatively by myself has certainly been a challenge, and especially now bearing some of the consequences that I made, some of the consequences of the decisions that I made early on in my collegiate career has certainly been a challenge.
All right. So when we, hopefully y'all heard that. Christine, did you hear that? Oh, great. So when we listen to Greg's story, it's a bit of both, right? It is a bit of the story of self and the story of us. So he talks about the fact that his parents didn't go to college, their parents didn't go to college, their parents didn't go to college, right? So he gives you some insight into what has kind of led him to this moment of struggling and bearing the brunt of the student debt crisis as a first generation college student. And then he also, and within that, he shares a story of us, right? Many Black Americans have that experience of being first generation college students due to the structures of our society, right? So he kind of shares that. What's missing from this would be the story of now. What do we do next to sort of, and we did put action pages behind this, but just giving you all an example. This is a really good example of the story of self and the story of us. And to make this like a complete narrative, you'd want to put in that story of now, like what do we need to do? What do we need Biden to do? What do we need our state legislators to do to help find some student debt relief for college students and graduates? So this is just an example of what the story of self and us look like. Let's look at another example.
I think the greatest challenge is.
No, you're great. So not all stories have to be video, although videos are really powerful because we all are inundated with social media and text so much that our attention tends to hit on video, but we can also do things like blog posts. So this is a blog post on the value of community college by one of our youth advisory board members named Pablo. He went to Austin Community College and then transferred over to UT. And he really talks about how there's a real chance for Congress to start working on making two-year community college and trade schools tuition free for all Americans. And he really gets into talking about how he wouldn't have been successful without his experiences at Austin Community College. And he talks about how 1/4 of all students actually begin at a community college and then go to a four-year school. So this is really a good example of the story of us and the story of now, because he's bringing in how all of these different students actually start at the community college level with the intention to transfer, and how because of that, these are the actions that need to be taken on behalf of the community college student community. This is another great example. This is from Katie Moreno. She's a parenting student. So a lot of folks might not know this, but many folks at community colleges, you all probably know this, but are parents of dependent children or taking care of children. And so this is her experience talking about how her 6-month-old child was referred to a specialist and had to be diagnosed with a special condition and needed Medicaid to treat it. And she's really talking about how her son kind of owes his life to this program and how important this program was. So this is also a really good example of both story of self and now. All right, and then we're going to look a little bit at Juanita's story. Let's talk about this one.
When you're applying for Medicaid and you finally get Medicaid, it's very hard to find a doctor who accepts it. So you're getting a lot of no's before you get a maybe or a yes. And I was at that point almost 12 to 13.
The sound is out, Aurora. Aurora, the sound is gone.
Aurora, can you hear us?
Sorry about that. It sounds like the sound was gone.
Yeah, the sound, it started off and then it cut out.
Oh, let's try it again. Can you hear it now?
I can hear you.
The first appointment that I
Yeah, okay, here.
Now we can't? Okay.
had,
Yeah.
it was just getting an ultrasound to confirm the pregnancy. I didn't even see a doctor. I just saw a nurse. I was like, oh, we're waiting to see this doctor that I've been on this rapid search for, and I didn't. Around 20 weeks, I finally saw the doctor. That's when I figured out what I was having. So initially the doctor diagnosed me with gestational diabetes, but that was it. It was like, you have this. It was no, oh, let's see a nutritionist, let's set you with a plan. Here's a meter, here's a machine. It was like nothing was given to me. So when I went in, I'm all excited, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna figure out what I'm having. All that stuff you see on the TV to let you know, see that right there, that's your baby's head. And that's your, no, it didn't happen like that. I'm looking at her, she's looking at the screen, she types some stuff, something goes, yeah, it comes out, she rips it, she puts it in the paper, and she hands it to me. And I open it, and I was like, oh my God. And I look over, and she's out the room, she's gone already. So I was stripped that happy moment to figure out the sex of my kid. I don't know. I wonder if I had Blue Cross, would that have been different? I was scared. Her saying that I'm going to kill my child based off of me having diabetes. And sometimes I was like, should I eat today? Or should I not eat today? I was terrified. I felt as though we just be quiet and just go in here and just be thankful that I found someone who take my insurance, which is Medicaid, and go from there. But I always felt like I wanted to say something, but I was afraid to. On May 19th, I went in for a biophysical profile and my son's heart rate started to drop. And I had to have an emergency C-section. Doctor wasn't there. There was like another doctor in the group that had delivered my son that I did not know. After I had my son, he goes in for a 6 weeks checkup. And then shortly after that, I got a letter telling me that I'm no longer on Medicaid. Now I still have diabetes. So I'm thinking, what am I gonna do now? And so my family would pitch in and give me medicine. And I know that's like illegal. It's take my family's medication or die. And I don't have any insurance to cover me as I'm caring for this newborn kid. What am I gonna do? So I reapplied for Medicaid and I got a letter saying that my income is exceeding the eligibility. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Now at this point, I have my son, I'm caring for him. I don't have a job. I barely have a home to stay in. What qualifies me? I don't know.
Insurance for pregnant women ends right at about 60 days after delivery. What we found is that many of the morbidities happen after that 60-day period. Some women develop hypertension after the pregnancy is over. We see increases in deaths from suicide and drug overdose. And so it's really critical to continue to provide care for women after they deliver.
Everything that you already had is going to intensify when you're pregnant. And you need to just be an advocate for yourself and do your research. I don't think anyone's going to call you. I don't think anyone's going to tell you what to do or how to do it. Most importantly, I feel like speak up for yourself, because there was so many times that I was there and I was like, I'm going to say this. I'm going to stand up for myself. And I didn't. And I think that's important.
So sorry, the volume cut out. I muted myself and didn't think that that would impact this. But yes, so this was a really powerful example from Juanita of the story of self, right? And how she had to navigate her pregnancy and then navigate the horror of like not having access to healthcare after she delivered her baby. And this wasn't in the story here, but Juanita is actually also an HCC student and was kind of navigating all of that while also trying to attend college, right, and sort of finish her classes. So we really wanted to share this with you all because it's a powerful example of a story of self and how we can like really motivate people and move people with our personal narratives and experiences.
When you're applying for Medicaid.
Next one. Okay, we had a couple more examples, but I think you all get the point. Just for the sake of time. The storytelling is impact, right? It moves people, it can move legislation, and it can move you. And that's really what we want you all to kind of take away from these examples today. Christine, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about storytelling collecting.
Yeah, so storytelling collecting is more than like we can share our own stories, we can talk about what's going on in our own world, but how much more impactful would we be if we were collecting the stories of more people and putting those together in some type of fashion? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about right now. So why is story collecting important and what is its purpose? I think being involved first as an advocate in Young Invincibles, I really got to understand like, why do I need to tell my own story as someone with type 1 diabetes who's been struggling to get her degree? But working more with Aurora and her team, I got to see a lot more about why story collecting is so important. And I would love, Aurora, if you could just pitch in to maybe an example or something that you guys worked on due to the collection of stories.
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest reasons why it's important is definitely what you said, Christine, around shifting it from like, if I'm the one that's experiencing navigating healthcare and going to college, it can't just be me, right? And so it's this idea of sort of sharing power when we're speaking to our decision makers. letting them know it's not just Christine or Aurora that's talking about this issue. There are hundreds of community college students, if not thousands, that are experiencing very similar things and really need more access to resources or new ways of thinking and designing our programming, right? I think another big piece of this is that it really helps humanize and helps decision makers and legislators understand the issue a lot better. It's one thing to say we really need to extend the Medicaid coverage 12 months after a woman gives birth, excuse me. It's another thing to like bring Juanita or share Juanita's story with the legislators so they can really kind of like humanize and understand the issue in a way that data points and fact sheets just don't do. And so that's really the purpose. Our decision makers get a lot of data and a lot of numbers thrown at them all the time, but hearing from their constituents and hearing from students really helps humanize the stories and really helps them understand the issues that much more.
Yeah, that's very powerful. So some of the things we're going to talk about in story collecting is how should we approach story collecting? What's the step-by-step process? What tools should we use? And what happens after we collect the stories? How should we approach story collecting? Know your goals. I think this is probably the most important part because there's a lot of different issues in higher education. I think and if you're in SGA, you know this, every meeting you get in, and there's 15 different things that are going on, but you want to make sure that you've channeled the story collecting effort that you have to a specific goal so that you can know what is the specific audience that you're trying to reach. Know what stories you're interested in learning more about. So maybe everybody on your board is a first generation college student or vice versa. Maybe you need the opposing viewpoint, and that's the stories that you really need to get shared with your administration or our legislators. How to communicate your intent with the storyteller. So I think this definitely goes back to Aurora's point on the story of now, right? Like you may have the stories, you may have the information, but what is the intent of even putting this or asking people to be vulnerable with you and share their information so that you can take it to the next level? And think about the product you want to share. Is it written? Is it video? Is it audio? I think all of these different avenues definitely have merit, especially in this online world. But thinking about how everybody's like zoomed out and tired of reading emails, maybe your story collection efforts can shift to something a little bit different. What's the step-by-step process? So identification is going back to like the goals, thinking about what is the root of the issue? Where are we starting from? What exactly are we trying to do? The approach, maybe the best way to get people to talk about their experiences with something very controversial like medical needs is not in a group setting. Maybe you need to reach students one-on-one. Maybe you need to incentivize the participation by offering a gift card or a shirt or something that would be of interest to them. What does the conversation look like? One of the trainings that we did with YI was about facilitative listening, and it wasn't just sitting, kind of like how Juanita explained the doctor, taking down stuff and writing it down, but helping the person feel validated in their response and making it a dialogue instead of it just being a monologue. Note taking. There's so many different ways you can take notes, whether that be on paper or on a computer, or maybe you're just going to listen to the recording and do it later, but making sure you can grab some very great quotes so that if you can't use the entire story, you can use part of the story. Conversion. After you have this Excel sheet or, your notebook, your documents, is it going to be a PowerPoint? Is it going to be a brochure? Is it going to be a one-pager? Really thinking critically how you can organize the information into a way that is easy to read and that people will want to watch or listen to. And then approval, and I'll let Aurora jump into this as well, but I think of the approval topic, I really think about going back to the people you shared your story with and saying, look what we've done with your information. Look at the impact that's going to be created from what you've shared.
Absolutely. That is a very, very key step that builds trust within the communities that you all are organizing in or advocating for. And think about yourself, right? You would never want someone to misrepresent a quote that you said or show you in a video that you didn't like, or maybe you weren't feeling cute that day, whatever it may be, you have the right not to share that story. And so making sure that we just treat our communities with respect and trust them and go back to those people and show them what the end product is and say, is this okay, before I kind of share it out.
What tools should we use? Audio recording I found to be really helpful when listening to people, just in case you miss something, or like I think this goes back to like not misquoting someone, right? Having something that you can refer to. Note taking electronically. I actually don't know that many people who take paper notes, but if you do, like, shout out to you. But I think if you're working with the team, you definitely wanted something you can email very quickly or something you guys can edit together. And then if that person is comfortable, video is always a great option, because kind of how we saw Juanita's face, we heard her story. We saw Greg's face, we heard her story. You know, and I know that Pablo's like blog post probably had excellent points, but it just makes it so more you're easier to empathize with someone you can actually see. What happens after we collect? So transcribing the information. So maybe you have it in a format, like we said before, that is not like appealing to the eyes or very flashy, transcribing it over into something that is a little bit more like eye-catching with colors or pictures. Identifying key elements of the story. So if you look at like Why Eyes post, they always like bold stuff or move the quotes into like little boxes, like really pulling out the parts that really spoke to what exactly we're collecting stories on. Connect to a broad issue. So I think like it's easy to say that like students may be experiencing hunger, but like what are the bigger community issues that are going on? A lot of people are experiencing hunger. Maybe instead of just going to one place or one person, say, you know, Houston Food Bank, we're having a lot of students who are going through this, or hey, organization that's traditionally helped with this, can we like let you know as well that you're working on this issue, but we have another section of students that really need to focus on as well. And then the core message and call to action, making sure that that core message is very direct as something that's memorable, and then connecting it either a bill that's already been filed, maybe like your policy agenda if your organization has one, or just like a, you know, let's do a phone bank and let's call our legislators and let them know, or let's do like a Twitter blast. I think after the Sick of It Texas like expand Medicaid rally that we had last year, they sent over 200 tweets to Greg Abbott asking to expand Medicaid. So that's a direct call to action that everybody can jump into like right then and there. And how to deliver and share our story everywhere. I feel like you can share it like in one place, right? If you only have an Instagram or whatever, but you'd be surprised just how many areas people will actually jump into your cause. I recently did an event and I shared it like via email and social media and through other social medias, and you know, trying to get press release and all these different things. And so many people were like, wow, I was very unaware of this. Thank you for sharing this with me, and I'll keep it moving. And you would be surprised how far things go when you open up your horizon to share it in as many places as possible.
So these are a few examples of how we've done some accessible storytelling and calls to action. One of the campaigns we were working on was around C campus, which means childcare on campus means, oh my gosh, I can't remember what it means, but it's basically a campus-based childcare support. It's like a grant that community colleges and four-year colleges can pull from to bring childcare centers onto their campus. It means parents in schools, sorry. But this is the C campus work that we were doing. And this is an example of kind of how we were getting parenting students to sort of share their stories. So one of the things that we did was something that Christine was talking about, was we listened to stories, we listened to parenting students from across the country who were going to college, and we gathered some really key quotes from them. And then we put the quotes with their photos to make these social media graphics. One of the things I think, and you all as community college students know this very, very well, all too well, is that a lot of our legislators and decision makers, when they think of a college student, they have a certain person in their mind. And that person is traditionally 4-year, that person might be traditionally male, they might be traditionally white, they might be traditionally living in a dorm. They might not have struggles with food insecurity, housing insecurity, mental health, parenting children. All of the different ways that we know that we're incredibly diverse as students, a lot of our legislators just don't have that image in their head. And so one of the things that we found is really powerful, to Christine's point, is like, if you're gonna do something written, really pair it with like an image to really like understand and change the framework of what today's students really look like. These are community college students that we see on our campuses like every day. These are our friends, families, right? And so making sure that decision makers really know that and understand that, and that legislation and decisions around budget, and funding need to really reflect who these students are today in 2021. So this is just an example of how we did that. And this is really easy story collecting. Can I get a quote, a picture of you and your family, package it, put it together, and we can kind of send it out to decision makers. And this is just one way that we do this through YI, but I think you can use the same concept through like Google form or however you want to do it. But we have a form on our website where people can enter in their information, put in their story, and we can then follow up with them and do the work that Christine was talking about. But if you're working with TACC or you're working with your SGA, whatever that looks like, you can do the same thing with a Google form. Just kind of track who your storytellers are and track those meetings that you're going to be having. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about crafting public comment and testifying. We are in a legislative session and we are doing community college advocacy weeks. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this and give you all some tips on how to craft it, because it does look a little bit different than Pablo's blog or Juanita's story or Greg's story, or even the quotes. It's a little bit different when you want to craft public comment and testimony. And so we have a framework we use at YI called VOSA, and it really helps us frame our written public comment or our in-person testimony if you feel it's safe to do so. So these are just a framework and some tips to help you do that. So when you're crafting your message, and usually you need, write this first before you can kind of get your 2 minutes to speak or testify, you really want to think about the value. And so what's the value that you have in common with this committee that you are about to speak in front of, or this committee that you're submitting this comment or testimony to? A big value is that everyone wants to see community college students be successful. Everyone knows that education is key to economic security for young people, right? So that could be an example of a shared value that you have. So you really want to start there. Because believe it or not, we're all starting from the same place. We just have different strategies on how to get there. So you're trying to convince people that your strategy is the right one, but we actually have common values in our state. The next thing you want to do is talk about the opportunity or the problem. And so really, this is a way to kind of get them to understand that story of us, of like, what are you trying to accomplish today? What's caused the situation today? And what data do you have to support this opportunity? And we like to frame it as an opportunity. So like, for example, community college students having difficulty transferring is an opportunity to figure out how we can produce some legislation that makes that process easier for community college students. And this is the data that's like supporting how all the opportunity that we have to do so. The next piece in VOSA is the S, which stands for solution. So what can be done to solve the problem? And then the A is action. What can the person, the committee, the audience that you're speaking to do right now and in the future to help address it? So I'm gonna give you guys a look at what VOSA looks like in action. So let me see. Okay, today's, this is a value, right? So today's young people hold our collective prosperity in their hands. To reach their full potential, we have to ensure that their families have access to the things they need: higher education, good jobs, stable housing, and the ability to have savings and assets to achieve financial stability, right? This is a great example of a value, something we all hold, something we all know is true. So you want to start there. Here's our opportunity. Student loan burdens, this is a student loan example, including the consequences related to default and delinquency, are undermining that financial stability for borrowers, even after they leave the higher education institution. And student loans present hurdles to building savings, maintaining good credit, and owning a home. That's an example of opportunity. So what's the solution? Well, we need to expand need-based aid in Texas and stop state disinvestment. And we need to create a more borrower-friendly student loan repayment system and increase borrower protections. So those are some solutions that you're bringing to the table. And then your action might be, can I connect you with people who can educate you on what student debt looks like in your districts? Can I count on you to support legislation that protects student borrowers, right? So that's an example of how you can sort of frame your testimony in public comment. And we use this all the time at YI. It's really, really a really great and simple framework on how to, I'm sorry, my cat's in the way, how to build out public testimony.
My computer is frozen. Can you
Is
guys?
Aurora frozen?
I was like, is it me that's frozen? Is it like I didn't know.
No, I believe Aurora is frozen. So yeah, you want to filibuster, Christine, while Aurora maybe tries to figure out her technical issues?
Yeah, so absolutely. The next slides actually were just talking to us about okay, you're back. Okay.
I don't know what happened. My internet went out. Can you share your? Is my screen still up?
No.
Okay, wait.
No.
So sorry. I was in the middle of like giving an impassioned speech, I think.
You had your impassioned face was frozen mid word, but
Okay.
we could convey. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
So did we hear everything about VOSA?
Yes, we did.
Oh, great. Great. Now we're on the media tips. Sorry about that, y'all. And so this is around once you start collecting stories, media might be reaching out to you. They're going to see how incredible you are of an advocate and an organizer on behalf of community college students, and they might reach out. So I wanted to give a couple of tips on if that happens, what you can kind of do. So 3 big things. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to answer every question. And you should never speculate or guess. And just remember that this is an opportunity to have them take away what you want them to take away. And this might be a really incredible opportunity to connect them to one of your storytellers, and you should use it as such. But just never guess, never use false numbers. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to know the answer to everything. And this is a way to get them to take away the actions and the story of now that you want to convey. So use that opportunity to do so, and not as an opportunity to like fudge numbers about outcomes for community college students or anything like that. Don't feel any pressure to do that. Always try to connect them to storytellers if you can, and really try to convey your story of now that you're trying to come across. So Christine, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about taking action. What do we do with all of this like information?
So all of this information is great, and we are so happy and honored to share it with you. And so we just want to give you some like, you know, the story of now, what can you do next, and how can you take this back to your teams? So this is Community College Student Week, and there's still opportunities if you haven't even spoken to your advisors about scheduling with legislators to maybe see if you could do that outside of Community College Week, like before or after spring break. So we still have some time in session. Talk to your legislators. There is a website called TLO. And if you Google it, like TLO Texas, it'll come up. You can look at what bills have been filed and what's already been referred to the Higher Education Committee. And you can maybe like say, hey, we're really passionate. Like there's a discussion about a Texas Promise program, right? Maybe that's just something you're passionate about as a team. You guys look it over and say, we want to call one of our legislators and talk to them about this is something that we support, or we see some opportunities for change in this particular bill. Share your story. Maybe you haven't even shared your story of your struggle with your SGA or with your student body to your administrators. Sit down with them, ask if you can call a meeting, give them some points of things that you want to discuss, and let them know that you really want to just open the door for opportunity. Like with the HCC, we have 6 colleges, each with their own SGA and then a district SGA. So we have 50 officers. And so we're always talking all the time. And like one of the things we asked was for an opportunity to sit in front of our college presidents and just share the stories of what we were seeing from students on Facebook, what we heard in our meetings. And we were just so blown away with how ready they were to listen and how they came back to us with some action items of things that they were going to get done to help students. And that segues perfectly into build a community presence. So talk to your advisors or your students about how you can build a group that's going to allow you to share your story of us with the community, with your student body, with your administration, and definitely with your legislators, because I think that in a lot of the things that have been published, you know, with like the CARES Act, community colleges were kind of left on the outskirts in some of those places, and it's not too late to talk about that. And then use your media platforms, whether that's email, social media, text messages, anything that you have. Find a way to connect with the students that are on your campus and to connect with your community about what's going on with your student body. So we are at the conclusion of our presentation, and we just want to thank you so much for sticking with us through this entire thing. We are still available for any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, but definitely copy down Aurora's email or any of the social media information you see here, Young Invincibles on Twitter and Facebook, so that we can continue to connect with you and share all the storytelling efforts that we have. And Aurora, I'll turn the last slide over to you. You're muted.
Yes, I know. I was trying to share my email in the chat, but I'll put it in after. Yeah, I definitely, if you all have any questions, definitely reach out to me. I think we try to help young people share their story through numerous channels, whether that be social media, op-eds, blogs, as we showed earlier, news articles. We often try to connect young people with the media, press releases, conferences, community events such as the Community College Advocacy Week, advocacy days, and any creative new projects that we're kind of taking on. So we're always really interested in hearing the stories of community college students. You all have such incredible insights and amazing stories to share. And community colleges have just been such a source of strength, I think, and resilience. And sort of, I'm thinking about you, Christine, and all the work that you did when the CARES Act came down and making sure that young people knew and understood how to navigate the resources that were available to them. And I think when we think about the future of education, we really have to look to community college students as in what you all need. And so we just really welcome and hopefully that you will join us and TACC in doing that. I think I see something in the chat here. Oh, thank you, Christine. Really appreciate it. Does anyone on the call have any questions for us at all before we wrap this up? Yes. Okay. Oh, I don't have any questions, but thank you. Appreciate your time. Yes, we appreciate your time too. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Dr. Gonzalez.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Aurora and Christine, for the presentation. That was wonderful. And in fact, I was actually taking notes via pen and paper. Some of the tips that you shared in terms of ways to storytell and help young adults share their experiences in a way that's meaningful and impactful are the same tips that we share with experienced professionals. And so these are things that will serve you greatly, not just in your current roles, for those of you who want to do advocacy work and storytelling, whether it's local, state, federal, just in your communities, but even in future in terms of your professional endeavors, whatever you may choose to do. And so I really appreciate those kind of tips with regards to communicating your message. And again, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. Not just for us right now, but across the state in terms of advocating for those who often go without a voice. So in closing, thank you all for tuning in to this important conversation, and a special thank you again to Aurora and Christine, Young Invincibles organization, for the valuable advice that was shared. As a reminder, all of these conversations are recorded and will be available for reference on our website at talktacc.org under the Student Week tab. We invite you to engage with us on social media at TACC_news using hashtags CCWeek 2021 or hashtag TX Community Colleges. And as one of my favorite mentors and faculty members used to tell me as we were ending a class or ending a meeting, go forth and do good work. And so good luck with everyone and go forth and do good work.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye, you guys.